coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about student interest in blockchain technology. Reimagine 2020.
Hi, Patrick. My name is Dr. Alex Cahana. I am Chief Medical Officer and Head of the European, Middle East, and African markets at ConsenSys Health. We are the, I would say, largest blockchain and healthcare company in the world. And I am super excited to be part of Reimagine 2020, because that's what we really need to do. We don't need to recover from COVID, the covering again, but actually reimagine the post-pandemic world. So it's great to be here and looking forward to talking to you.
Hey everybody, it's Patrick McLain here again, one of your hosts at Reimagine 2020. I've got another really special guest here that I think you guys are gonna enjoy listening to. I've had the ability to kind of read and listen to some of his conversations and viewpoints in the market the last week or so. So I'll go ahead and Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. It's a pleasure to meet you, Patrick, and thanks to the audience at Reimagine 2020 for being here. I'm Alex Cahana. I am Chief Medical Officer and Head of the European, Middle East, and African markets at ConsenSys Health. ConsenSys Health is the largest blockchain healthcare company. And I would say very simply, I'm on a mission to blockchainize healthcare and healthify, if that's a real word, healthify the crypto space. A little bit about myself. I like to write on Medium on my moniker that I lived 4 lives in one, which means not only that I'm old, but also that I know the dirty little secrets of each life. I have a military background, which means not only that I'm mission-driven, data-driven, and situation-aware, but I fundamentally believe that none of us is as good as all of us, and really believe that distributed trust is the way to go. I had a full academic career in pain medicine. I'm an anesthesiologist and military medicine doc that built 5 pain centers throughout the world, in Israel, in Japan, in Switzerland, and in the US. So it's safe to say that I'm familiar with the healthcare system in the world. Always been a system thinker, always believed that you have to deliver treatments, protocols, standards to patients, and came to the US in 2007. Got quickly exposed into the, I would say, opioid epidemic, and helped out with some, I would say, guidelines that later became the blueprint for the CDC guidelines, regulation, legislation, and how to provide treatments and care safely and balance I would say, care and dangers that are associated with opioids. I became a subject matter expert for the DoD and the VA, which means that I'm used to working with large healthcare systems, and has been involved in technology integration in the clinical workflow for at least 15 years. Got bit by the blockchain bug, I would say, in 2014, which is, I think, decades ago, and started to write about it, and we'll talk about it for sure in the next coming hour, and co-authored the textbook of blockchain in healthcare. And like I said, really excited to be part of the ConsenSys Health family and really create a new digital resilient healthcare system sustainable for the future ahead.
Awesome. Well, definitely impressive resume, and it seems, like you've definitely had enough different outlooks in life that have kind of formed your opinion on and kind of brought you to this point. So I'm sure a lot of the students listening to this conversation are going to really appreciate it, and we know that health is one of the things that they're always looking at. So I wanted to kind of dive in, and I wanted to kind of, specifically, I think you have a background in health, right? So this is a unique conversation, or you have a unique perspective. But I think when we look at the world right now, right, and obviously we're not in normal times, right? If you go back even 5 months ago, We have a massive health crisis, right? And then you look at economies are kind of in turmoil, right? The last time we saw anything remotely close to this in comparison in recent memory is 2008, right? Which is kind of the inception of Bitcoin, or around the same time of inception of Bitcoin and blockchain. So my question to you is because of what we're experiencing, what doors do you think are open? And I would say, you know, psychological or other, like, do you think that maybe the global community is more open-minded and this will present new opportunities for change in healthcare and blockchain?
Yeah, no, excellent question, Patrick. And there's never like a good crisis to change the world. First of all, you know, when people ask me what has changed since COVID or the pandemic started, they expect me to say, oh, you know, I work remotely from home, or, you know, I'm not eating out. But actually what really has changed is that people are starting to get interested in what I've been doing in the last 5-6 years and saying, hey, Dr. Cahana, isn't that blockchain thing that you're doing really necessary for what's happening? And I think that what this global biological threat has brought upon us is to understand the interdependence between each other, that actually my behavior here in New York can influence a small island in the South Pacific, and someone in China and their behavior can impact my life. So not only is it a humbling experience, but it's also a recognition of the distributed and decentralized nature actually of the planet. And I think that people now are starting to embrace I would say, different concepts that blockchain brings in, because I think that blockchain is not just a technology, but blockchain is a mindset. And that peer-to-peer economic activity, that's really what's starting to make everybody say, maybe there's something interesting going on. And I would just end by saying that people want to come back to normal. And I would argue that we're not going to get back to normal, because normal is what brought us to where we are. The fragility and frailty of our economic, social, and health systems is because we live in an economy that has low capacities and low capabilities. And so what we are trying to do through DLT is really build that digital resilience. And so we're not going to get back to normal. We need to hence reimagine, not recover. I don't like when people say recovery, because it's like covering again. So we're not going to recover or cover again all the frailties and fragilities. We're going to reimagine and remake the world ahead.
Got it. So when we think about that, and I think one thing that people are experiencing now that I've been very curious about, right? Because I think this is a very interesting experiment. You know, I think really looking at isolation, you know, people being in their house, like psychologically, how are they going to handle this? And even when someone says, you can come outside now, are they going to go run outside, right? Or will there be this, you know, kind of lasting stigma, and that maybe trickles on for many more months? So I have a question, and something I was reading that you wrote that intrigued me. You were writing about how you think that the opposite of health is isolation, where some people might think of it as, you know, opposite of health is disease, for example. So I'm just curious your perspective now that we are really experiencing isolation, right? Where people are kind of being forced into boxes per se. You know, what impact do you think that's going to have on the global psyche? And, you know, what are the technologies or things that, you know, either in blockchain or things that allow us to kind of communicate and intertwine? What do you think some of the opportunities are there?
Yeah, you are right that I think one of the reasons why we don't have a healthcare system but a disease management system is because we think that the opposite of health is disease and death, when actually it's just a way, you know, it's through disease and illness we become isolated, and our world contracts and becomes smaller and smaller until, you know, one day you feel so alone. And then you decide to take, I don't know, OxyContin, Xanax, and Chardonnay. And that happens every 12 minutes in the US. So it's not as if it's something that's very rare. And so if you believe that for one second that the opposite of health is isolation, then you also believe that the journey back to health is through connectivity. And that connection could be connection to data. It could be connection to family, to friends, to faith, to social media. So the way I like to explain it is that if we take the I out of illness and we put we in it, it turns into wellness. So we are social beings, and we can sense it now with the pandemic. You know, it's like when you're hungry and the only thing you can think about is food. So it's like now when we're grounded or we're stay at home, the only thing we can, you know, think about is how do we go out. And you're absolutely right. And the technologies that will come to bear are those that enhance our connectivity. And I actually disagree.
Like Zoom recordings and video conferences.
Well, it's really interesting what it does, the way we talk and the way we interact and maybe listen to each other a little bit more, because if we interrupt, then everything freezes. But I disagree when people say that technology actually makes us more alone. I think that technology doesn't do anything. I think it's what people do with technology. I don't think blockchain does anything, or artificial intelligence does anything, or your iPhone does anything. I think it's what you do with it. And through gamification and peer-to-peer interactions, you can actually incentivize people to engage in a fun way. And so if I say to a patient now, I want you to jump for 20 minutes, they're going to say, I can't, I'm too tired. But if I'm going to slap on them some virtual reality and have them, you know, start to hunt and run around, they'll do that activity because it's fun. So I think we're entering a stage of virtualization. We're entering a stage of a whole ocean, exabytes of data that really describe who we are and what we are through our activities, and an opportunity with DLT to create incentives, tokenomics, if you wish, that can encourage us to behave well and discourage us to behave from behaving poorly. And that brings with it a whole host of not only technological questions, but also questions of ethics and governance and policy.
100%. And I think those are interesting points, you know, across a myriad of technologies, you know, whether you look at, you know, artificial intelligence, right, and the ethics there, when self-driving cars, when there's a child in the street, right, and the car has to make a decision between, you know, driving the passenger into a tree or, you know, unfortunately hurting a pedestrian, right? These are the ethics that we're going to be building in, I think, into our technology that, you know, philosophers and, you know, positions like this are really going to have a interesting place at the kind of think the forefront. So real quick, I wanted to pick your brain. And one of the real topics we're trying to talk about this conference is really around adoption. And I think adoption can take many forms, right? I think we could say we kind of know we've adopted some aspects of blockchain. So we know Bitcoin works, for example, right? Maybe some other coins, not so much. We've kind of seen some glimmers of hope. You know, obviously everybody kind of defaults to the same fintech or supply chain use cases. You've kind of seen a lot of pilots. You know, I don't know if the world can say, hey, we've completely adopted blockchain yet. You and I were having an interesting conversation before we started this, and you were mentioning how you think it's the healthcare use case is very intriguing for blockchain for a variety of reasons. Do you mind touching base on that?
Of course. And I'll disclose that I think that healthcare is everything, the most important thing. And if you're investing in anything else but healthcare, I would say just drop it and come to healthcare. No, but in all seriousness, I think that before I talk about adoption and what are the use cases, I would say that change is hard. Change is hard, and I don't know if you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief. You know, Kubler-Ross, she described, you know, 5 stages of when we change or when we grieve over change. And I think that the audience and even yourself have to kind of ask yourself, what stage are you in that journey of a new world? So the first stage is denial. Okay, it's not a thing. And there are a lot of people that think that DLT is not a thing. And I have to admit that COVID changed that a lot of people who thought that it's not a thing or a silly thing or a corrupt thing or something Now we're saying, wait a second, maybe there's a there there. And after the next stage of denial comes the stage of anger. And we've seen a lot of angry people. I invested in this, I lost money on that. They promised me this great technology, nothing is happening. It's been already 2 weeks, it's been already 2 years, it's been a 10 years, you know, killer app, how is it, nothing? And that's fine, that means that you're in stage 2. Stage 3 is bargaining. So we start to say, well, you know, it's good, but maybe not for everything, and maybe not ICOs, but STOs. But STOs are here, but not IEOs, and I don't know. And so you go this kind of like back and forth and all this. And then you become really depressed. That's stage 4. It's like, oh my God, this is like really not moving. What is happening here? And that's good because you know that the next step is going to be acceptance. And obviously I've been in stage 5 for a while. And so
well, and there's not to cut you off, but there's one interesting point that I kind of plays off what, and I see it all the time. We work with a lot of universities, and I always try to tell everyone, you know, I feel okay, maybe I'm a little bit in the crypto space, or you're a little bit in the crypto space. There's a fair amount of pessimism, and it's pessimism from people that were in it 3 years ago, right? With all this ICO stuff. Okay, so I'm talking, you know, 30, 35, 40 people who have been in it for 3, 4, 5 years. There's a bit of pessimism. Well, then I'll get on a call with 30 universities, or, you know, some weekly meeting or something, and you've got 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old kids. They've never experienced this pessimism, right? So they're like, I'm going to build an application, and I'm obviously going to use blockchain, right? And so it's just, I don't see this layer of pessimism, and they don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know to be.
They're just going fast through the 5 steps. You know, but the point being, you know, and I teach a lot and I talk to a lot of people, and that's, you know, the essence of my job. And we start always with, what the hell is Bitcoin? Why am I in this, you know, conversation? Why am I listening to Dr. Cahana? And 45 minutes later, it's like, oh my God, this is so awesome. When can you build me all this stuff? So I think that before we talk about the how, it's very important to talk about the why. And I think that a lot of people miss what is the secret sauce about blockchain. And they think of it more as a general purpose technology to make things faster, better, cheaper, and all that. And that's how the industry right now is looking at it. You know, how can I, you know, automate things? How can I decrease expenditure on doubling? And, you know, how can I dedouble? Or how can I, you know, create this a computational trust that will, you know, increase my margins? But the true secret sauce of blockchain is, of course, the peer-to-peer economic activity. That I know that you are you know that you are me, and I don't need a third person in the middle to validate the transaction, which could be a transaction of information, for example, right now, or data, or money. And I think that people just don't understand the why. And when people say, so what is blockchain? I say, well, you know, it's very simple. Blockchain is a software that was designed to solve the social problem of fake. Simple as that. Because we're just surrounded by stuff. I'm an optimistic person. I want to believe that what I'm hearing is correct. I want to believe that what I'm reading is correct. I want to believe my contracts. I want to believe that what I'm eating is what I think I'm eating. I want to believe the whole world around me, but it's hard. I can't. We're suffering from an infodemic. We're hearing so many things. The head is spinning. We're suffering from a cognitive overload. I don't know anything. And so when you have a system that bakes into it things like transparency, computational trust, immutability, the inability to change the data and the nature of the data in it, when you talk about that there's an interdependence by multiple people that want to maintain the system, because if not, then everything falls apart. Right now, we're suffering from what's called a moral hazard. Moral hazard means that one person can start to do risky things because they know that they're not going to pay for it, you're going to pay for it. So it's an unbalanced ecosystem, and DLT brings back into place that balance. And so in healthcare, the things that we look at, some of them are more obvious than others. So supply chain is very obvious, okay? The verification and authentication of the provenance of, I don't know, drugs. I want to make sure that this pill that I'm paying $100,000 for is that pill and it's worth $100,000. So that's, an easy, that's why the federal government is into supply chain. That's why all the large companies are into supply chain. You can follow with other technologies like Internet of Things or Internet of Health things. So that's an easy play. Then there's another one of credentialing. That's also a problem. How do you credential professionals? How do you know that I'm really a doctor? How do you know that I know what the hell I'm doing? If I want to move from one state to another, or from one country to another, how do I know that my credentials are, bona fide? So that too is like a supply chain of people, or a supply chain of the services that those people can do. So that's also an easy understanding, and there are large systems that are embracing it. But then we start to get into more subtle case uses or use cases that I think are actually really exciting. One, for example, is self-sovereign electronic health records. So that means that, nowadays you go to your doctor and an electronic health record doesn't belong to you. Except New Hampshire, by law, the electronic health record belongs to the person who produced that electronic health record. Everybody thinks it's the hospital, but it's actually the software company that created it. So your data is not yours. And so again, it's exposed to all the predatory practices that we see by the large, media platforms and the large, data companies. And
Google bought Fitbit, right?
Yeah, and that's why I don't have my Fitbit off. I don't have it anymore. The minute they bought it, I took it off, and now I'm just with Aura. That's it. So, and it's important because, and I write about this because, you are your activities. And your activities are captured by your data. So you are your data. And so when a third party takes it, sells it, uses it, abuses it, loses it, they take a piece of you. They take a piece of your dignity. And so this is not just privacy preserving technologies, and making sure that they're not lost or hacked, or some, North Korean, I don't know what, take and do with it whatever they want and sell it in the black market. It's actually, they're taking away something that belongs to me. And so the whole idea of decentralized identification, the idea of being it portable, the idea that it's sensor resistant, it's collusion resistant. That's what's really important. That's the true magic of blockchain, that it increases our human capacities and capabilities. And I don't call them privacy preserving technologies, but dignity preserving technologies. And this is why it'll take up, because like you said, the youngsters that are just like, of course I'll do it on DLT. It's like, why would I give myself to the man and have zero leverage on it? I don't recall, when 23andMe made this huge deal with Glasgow Smith and got 300. I don't remember getting a check, from that. So I think that we have to think of data and personal data not in terms of privacy, but also as a source of income. And that's really interesting. And that's what I talk about a lot, is how does that data suddenly become my good behavior a source of income? It's almost like a universal health basic income. So if I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't take drugs and someone saves money, I need to see a piece of it. And if I don't want to be part of that economy.
Definitely, a ton of interesting points there, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I think when you look at kind of the myriad of use cases or proposed use cases for blockchain, it's interesting how many, if not all, touch healthcare, right? And I think we're spending a lot of time kind of looking for those slam dunk use cases where we can go and say, look, this is 1 billion people running on blockchain, it works, right? It seems to me like we really do need to triple down in the industry. And make sure that we're pushing, in that direction. So, hey, to dive in just a little bit, let's talk about healthcare, or specifically in some of the barriers to adoption. So, I'm hearing what you're saying, right? And that's you see an opportunity where blockchain can kind of help people, help systems, help add efficiencies in the healthcare space, and maybe in other practical ways of people's lives that can even affect their income, right? In the way that they're collecting and kind of owning their data. So if we can identify that there are a lot of benefits, let's talk about maybe the barriers, then why, right? So, who's stopping, or the decision maker, and kind of leveraging this technology? And I'll rattle off a few points, right? So Are there government regulatory restrictions that are causing slow adoption? Is there hesitation from the healthcare companies to fully commit to this type of technology? Is it a technology related issue? So is it that we don't have enough tooling or pilots, et cetera? And then I'll ask, like, do healthcare companies, do they care about blockchain? Is it something that they are actively seeking outside of just a good press release? Or is it something that they want to get ahead of the curve and really bring into their arsenal?
Yeah, all great questions, and I'll try to unpack it. I think that when you get to my age, you try to be very weary of conspiracy theories and all kinds of things, of bad things that are happening behind my back, because actually I don't think that people care that much about me that they want to do stuff. Beyond the resistance to change and the 5 stages that I talked beforehand, I think that yes, there are actors that think about adopting this technology as something that they will lose from it. There are not many, but there are folks that rightfully or wrongfully think that they will be disintermediated. They know that what they're doing doesn't bring value, and if you automate it, or if you bring in this type of technology, there will not be needed anymore. So, for example, the person that just sticks on a stamp, and asks for $20, I was asking for a visa somewhere, and there was a person who had to validate that I am who I am and put a stamp on it and charged me $20. Obviously, that's ridiculous, and it's a racket, because they didn't even check that I was who I was. I didn't show anything. They just put in a stamp and took the money. So I think that those players who clearly are intermediaries or third parties that don't have value, they are at immediate risk, just like a lot of jobs are at risk for automation. But I think that most people have, if you wish, healthy skepticism, because they don't really understand the difference between collaboration and centralization. These are 2 separate things, and people conflate between them. Wide collaboration is great. You need that crowd intelligence. We cannot solve this pandemic, this global biological threat, without having all the brains of the world collaborate together. You can't have a really common sense AI that is devoid of bias and deepfake if you don't have open and decentralized AI. And all that black box stuff that's going on, of course, will create all the limitations of artificial intelligence. So I think that people understand that none of us is as good as all of us. I think where people don't understand are what are the dangers of centralization. And if you just take COVID, for example, it's really simple. What we need to do is mass testing. That's it. You test everyone. If you have it, you say, stay at home. If you don't have it, continue. That's it. It's not complicated. But instead of spending trillions in dollars of trying to revive an economy that was stunted, and spend a couple of $1 billion on testing the crap out of everyone, we opt for mass surveillance. And so we feel that, oh my God, if there was just like one place where all the data would be, then that would be the best. And they don't understand that when you create that honeypot, it becomes attack vulnerable. It becomes censorship vulnerable. It becomes collusion vulnerable. So the barriers, or the major barrier for adoption, is that people don't understand, especially older people like myself who have lived in a centralized world, that it's decentralization that is digitally resistant, not centralization. And that in representative democracy, is, of course, I want to represent it. But if that representative doesn't represent you, it doesn't work. So that's why we understand liquid democracy. That's why we understand holacracy, where, you don't have a job description. I don't have a job description. I just think that that's what I want to do. So I put my pants on in the morning and strap on, a microphone, start to talk, and we're doing stuff. I don't need a job description or a third party to tell me, Alex, should you do this or do you need to do this? So Gen Zers, they understand. They're not going to ask permission. And so, yes, there are regulatory barriers. And yes, there are people who don't get it. But it really is part of a larger scheme that we think of the economy in terms of poverty. That if I have something, by definition, you don't have it. And that comes out from the world of commodities, that there are limited resources. And so if you have more gold, I have less gold. If you have more money, I have less money. But now, for those who are digitally native, they're born into an economy of data. That's an economy of abundance. That's unlimited. And you want to create that network effect. So if I'm a winemaker or a pill maker, I don't care about, I can make maximum 7 billion bottles of wine. Okay, it's a lot, but it's finite. But if I follow the data that of the behavior of the people that consume those bottles of wine, that is indefinite. And so if we start to go into a mentality of affluence, and that's what blockchain is, it's a mentality of affluence. There is enough for everybody to participate, and the more the merrier. That's how we're going to overcome the resistance of integration, and not kind of like, oh, if I'll do this, I'll lose something else.
Well, and I think you make a great point about resources, and something I've always tried to follow, or as interests me, is like space. Companies like Planetary Resources, that their goal is to go find asteroids full of platinum or gold, right, and tow them back to Earth and mine them. Well, it's say, okay, if you were to even pretend there was a gold standard or something close to it, how much money do you need printed when you're bringing asteroids full of resources now, right? The old economic books kind of go out the window. And I think this is a pretty interesting moment, right, where people had kind of thought about or talked about things like basic income, right? And now we're kind of staring at a place where, in a lot of ways, this level of unemployment hasn't been seen, and maybe some of the economy doesn't return for the next 6-9, months or 2 years or so, regardless of, I think, how optimistic people are. And I think humanity will probably have a decision to make at that point, which is, are we going to bind some artificial printed dollar and say we don't have enough and not everybody can eat, right? Or do we finally accept that to a certain extent, these things that we're imposing on ourselves are relatively artificial, right? And it's kind of up to us to devise new systems that we think will kind of suit us. Also, I wanted to comment on the holacracy part too, just because I've seen it. One of my good friends ran Zappos, and I watched what they did. I don't know if you saw, Zappos changed their whole organization to holacracy, right? And it was really interesting experiment. And I grew up in Las Vegas, so I kind of knew a lot of people at the company, and it was just what happens when a large company kind of says you don't have a title. They're changing the titles of their LinkedIn to in charge of fun or something like that, right? Or Safari Joe. What do you do when you don't? When you can do whatever you want, right? But at the same time, you're held accountable by the community. So I think there's definitely some interesting aspects there. And I know we only have a little bit of time here. I want to just kind of drill in to one aspect, and then I wanted to just get some of your thoughts for the few thousand students that are going to be listening out. I'm sure they'll want your opinion as they think about their careers and what they're really studying. But I wanted to just dive in a little bit deeper on the adoption side of healthcare. Just because this is something that always intrigues me. And I think it's something that people don't necessarily understand. I mean, obviously, I think one thing is people that are building DLT technology or blockchains. Our team has a pretty decent amount of engineers, so we're aware of it from the technical side. I've come to the conclusion in the last few years that it's not the easiest technology to build, right? We're still on the path of really figuring out what the best approach is, consensus mechanisms, etc. And it shouldn't be easy, right? What we're building is revolutionary. So I don't think it's something that needs to be rushed overnight. But as that technology kind of progresses, I think the other part that people miss are just how many actors kind of have to hop onto these systems and how big of a change internally it is, right? Whether you're an enterprise or a healthcare company dealing with suppliers or seed to sale, seed to table, right? How many different people kind of along that journey, you really need to get onto a authentication kind of signature system, right? So they have their ID. And then also, how do they pick between multiple blockchains, right? And I see this kind of in the enterprise space where I think companies are kind of nowadays, it's almost like they're defaulting to Hyperledger in a lot of senses because it's just easier for them, right? So I have a little bit of a fear, like, is everybody just going to end up using Fabric, right? Are we sure that's the best route to go? So just curious your thoughts. What are the roadblocks or what are the things you think need to happen today that could kind of really help speed up adoption in blockchain in healthcare?
Yeah, I would say like this. What we have on the bottom of the base are the legacy systems. You know, all the stuff that is out there, the IT infrastructure in healthcare, electronic health records, databases, clouds, security firewalls, HIPAA laws, you know, we have that. And on top, we have all these, you know, light bulbs, all these great ideas. Oh, you know, I can do remote temperature. I can do a COVID tracker. I can figure out your level of stress by Face ID. All these, you know, light bulbs. But there's nothing connecting. There's no grid. And it's only when there's an electrical grid that a light bulb, which is an app, becomes a killer app. So what we need is that grid. Now, Hyperledger or Ethereum or other platforms are part of it, but they're not all of it. And we need to create the grid and the rails and the networks and the orchestrators and the agents and the oracles that will create that grid. And so at ConsenSys Health specifically, we're working on it from our vantage point, that it's a combination of federated learning, where basically the algorithm goes to the data instead of, you know, data that we, instead of, you know, bringing all the data in one place and the algorithm going, you know, into it, we federate that. And we have privacy preserving technologies like zero knowledge proof, like homomorphic, like trusted execution environments, that basically I don't have to tell you anything to know what I'm talking about and divulge anything from it. And of course, the smart contract that speak to governance. So we need to build that grid in order to get, you know, the killer apps and the better adoption. I think that what's important to understand is, and when you ask are companies interested or not, is what is the difference between digital health or mHealth or whatever you want to put, iHealth or all the stuff that's coming versus DLT health? Is that all the digital health that has been happening since, I would say, I don't know, 2008, when the Obama administration passed the HITECH Act and said everything has to be digitized. So that created that, you know, economic wave that digital is everything in healthcare. Is that they're all patient-centric, which is great. You know, it's patient-centric. You got to think about the patient, designed for the patient, do the UI, the UX, everything for the patient. But what they don't do, and that's what DLT health is different. It's not like digital. DLT health is patient-driven, not patient-centered, patient-driven. That's the difference. That's the future. That it's that it's I have to behave in a certain way that will not only transform me from a healthcare service consumer to a health and wealth producer. And that's what has to happen in healthcare, because right now we're all consumers. So if you're a consumer, you know, the only thing that you have for the system economically to be viable is to consume more. And what you want actually is for people to produce health. So if I try to translate it in blockchain language, what we're doing, our healthcare system is transacting in death coins. Okay, the more death coins you have, the more sick I am, the more tests I need, the more pills I use, then the economy, you know, more coins are minted. It's great. If I get healthy, I'm a doctor, all my patients get healthy, I'm out of a job. So I have no incentive to get you healthy. I might want to get you healthy enough, but not too healthy. That's why I'm inventing all these, you know, pills for imaginary diseases like dysfunctions and I don't know what, and things that we're, you know, first world
like,
problems.
Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling sad? Did you wake up tired today?
And what people don't understand is that we are dealing with first world problems. Okay, I just came back from East Africa to Kibera, which is near Nairobi in Kenya, to the largest urban center.
I used to live in Tanzania for many years, so I know that area
Exactly.
well.
Exactly. And so you know what the problems are.
They've
Clean
been using
water.
M-Pesa for a decade when I was there. They were sending money from
Exactly. And
Nokia
so
cell
they
phones.
and so they understand blockchain. They talk to me in blockchain language without calling it blockchain. So while here
They don't
everybody's,
trust banks. They don't trust banks. They don't want
of
to put
course
their
they
money
don't
in a bank.
trust banks, they don't trust banks, they don't trust the government, they don't trust anybody except themselves. And they're holocratic because they know that if I won't take care of myself, nobody will take care of me. And so they want privacy. And they understood that we had conversations there. They totally get blockchain. They speak the language of blockchain without calling it blockchain. And it's only here in the first world where we have our first world problems where I don't, I have to decide what type of moisturizer do I want to use, is that I'm kind of like stunned that suddenly there's not enough toilet paper out there. And suddenly stunned at what? You mean I can't trust my government? I can't trust my bank? I can't trust all these representatives that are supposed to represent me? And so when you ask me barriers of adoption, it's because people don't get it. And it's easier for me to understand because I grew up in a country that was in perpetual war. So my worst day here in the United States is better than my best day over there. And so I smile when people say, oh, we don't have enough ventilators. And what do you mean you don't have enough? So bag them. I remember them when we would go to missions in Africa and there would be whatever pandemics back in the 90s. And there were families that would put in a tube, breathing tube, and a family member would bag them for a couple of weeks until they would wake up. And so the point being is that only when you are tried, just like the COVID tries us, suddenly you understand what are the limitations of your capacity and capability. Just to make sure that the audience understands, when I say capacity is the amount of time to survive. How much can you survive without something? That's your capacity. So how long can you survive without toilet paper? So I was taught how to wipe myself with one square. So I can survive with one roll single ply for a month. So my capacity is huge. But more importantly is, what are your capabilities? What is the amount of time to recover? And so if we are doling out trillions of dollars and debasing our currency and we don't even know where that money is going to, we have no tracking system. We have nothing to track. We have no, and we know that it's all politically driven. We know that a lot of it, even if it might have good intentions, are getting to the wrong people, the wrong time, to the wrong hands.
This latest stimulus payout could have been on a ledger that no one could have manipulated.
Exactly.
The public should have seen it every day.
Exactly. It's simple. So to quote Atul Gawande, I would say like this: what is special about these times of technology? There is something special in humankind right now, is that for the first time in our history, we make mistakes not out of ignorance, but out of ineptitude. We know what is right to do. We know. Technology has showed us. We just decide that we don't want to do it. And that is creating an unsustainable economy. And so to answer your question again, barriers of adoption, the inability to accept, the inability to execute, these are not questions of ignorance. This is a question of ineptitude. You know that it's like when I talk to a patient and say, you're not supposed to smoke. You're not supposed to take drugs. You're not supposed to drink alcohol. You know that you're supposed to sleep and be active and meditate and be mindful. You know these things. So why are you asking me about all the other things? Because they simply don't want to. And I hope that now that we're moving, and DLT will help with that, to an economy of a human-driven economy. Just like look for example in education. Okay, I grew up, sitting in a classroom, not saying anything and pretending that I'm listening. Look really serious. Now it's a flipped classroom, virtual, with blended technologies. It's all patient driven. So the quality of the education that you get is dependent not on where you study and who are your teachers, but yourself. And there's no reason, if you want to be today a PhD in artificial intelligence, you can be self-taught. How did I learn about blockchain? I didn't do any certificate. I didn't do any degree. I teach. And I say to my students, the first thing is, don't go to university. Why are you listening to me? I didn't go to university for that. I taught myself. And so it's student driven, it's patient driven, it is citizen driven. And today we live in an economy of abundance that we can do anything we want. And if we do it together with crowd intelligence, there is no problem. Climate change, future pandemics, global terrorist threats, there is nothing that we cannot withstand if we simply decide that that is what we want to do.
Well, and by the way, amazing points. And what you mentioned on the education side, I totally agree with. And I think there's some interesting parallels, even what we're seeing from our university initiative and a lot of these universities that will be listening to us speak. We came into it like early 2018, start reaching out to all the schools and realizing almost no schools had, accredited blockchain engineering courses. And it was happening so fast, and there was enough of a bad stigma tied to blockchain, like it was Bitcoin, right, for drug dealers or whatever. Like the schools weren't ready yet to touch it. So on campus, all of these student organizations start forming, right? And so really, I mean, we can attest that, I've seen almost every university in the world, and majority of blockchain education, collaboration, adoption, or really innovation on university level, I would say probably 80% of it is not affiliated with the engineering or with the actual, universities themselves. It's the CS majors, it's the data science majors that are kind of organizing and taking upon themselves to really, educate themselves and find alliances and find like-minded people. So actually, let's pivot to that. I know you only have a few minutes here, but what would some messages be for some of the students listening that are interested in blockchain and maybe thinking of it as a career path, or maybe what the next 5 years or so kind of holds for the technology? How should they be thinking about it?
Well, I think that blockchain means different things to different people. And so there are different career avenues according to your interest. For a lot of people, distributed ledger technology is that. It's a technology. So if you're interested in computer science, if you're interested in cryptography, if you're interested in everything that pertains to data structures and blockchain, and so it could be blockchain and AI, blockchain and IoT, blockchain and machine learning, then definitely there's a career there to develop, to go into understanding the different pieces of distributed ledger technology and what it has to offer. Then for some, blockchain means the currencies, cryptocurrencies. And so there's a whole financial, I would say financial and economic, anywhere from understanding trading and how to have capital markets work in a sustainable way and invest in it, all the way to macroeconomics and understand the fragility of our current systems and reimagine another economic system or a better economic system. And blockchain is the third thing, is its governance. It's about people interacting with each other. And so how do you create an ethical, political, social construct that also maintains sustainability? And so there are many ways to approach it. So there are many blockchains, not because they're private and permissioned or hybrid, but that you can do different things with it. That's why I always say that, technology doesn't do anything. It's what you do with that technology. And so I have a lot of friends that are technologists. I'm not a technologist, but I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by talented engineers that explain to me concepts that otherwise would have taken me weeks, if not months, to understand. I sit in New York, so a lot of finance people and entrepreneurs and understand the nuances and differences of centralized versus decentralized systems. And that's not something that I learned in medical school or that doctors know about, but they do need if they want to sustain their practices. And so I teach how do you sustain practices in the current system using decentralized tools if you wish to lessen your exposure to insurance companies. And then the third is really about governance. Is there a future democracy? Is there another way of interacting and maintaining the social fabric while respecting each other's privacy? And so everything is going to be healthcare, because your health is your family's health, is your employer's health, is your community health, your city, your state, your planet. And everything is blockchain because everything is distributed. Everything is all about us. Everything is all about peer-to-peer and creating trust, not just I trust you because you seem nice to me, but a computational trust that has verifiability and finality and auditability and traceability. So as long as we understand that tracing stuff and tracing transactions and tracing people are not the same, and we maintain our moral compass, this is great. And so all what I'm doing is being interested in continuing the planet. And that's the threshold. If you're interested and wondering why things are the way they are, healthcare and DLT will open that world to you.
Well, to all the students out there, I think if you're looking for promising job opportunities, you might be getting some pretty good advice right now. So I would make sure to take some notes. And like I mentioned earlier, I was able to listen to some of Alex's conversations over the last week, and I suggest you guys do the same. I think there's some really interesting interviews out there and pieces that he's written that definitely resided with me, and I think will as well with a lot of the people that are on this call. So hey, and I know you got to run, so I don't want to hold you on too long. I feel like we could probably continue this conversation easily for another hour. But I guess a last question. So you strike me as very optimistic. I'm probably the same. I'm also like realistic. I know enough about. I've been a programmer since I was a kid. I can write code. I'm decent in kind of understanding futuristic aspects or how things connect together for consumers, etc. So I really do see purpose in blockchain, but then at the same time, I do see that it is a decision that humanity has to make, right? And I give the example that if tomorrow every human on the planet went out and bought $100 in Bitcoin, you would see the world change the day after, right? They would literally help themselves. The price of Bitcoin would go up. Banks would start freaking out. They would start transacting with themselves. So I tend to believe that we are our own obstacle. If everybody just stood up tomorrow, demanded what they needed, it would take less than 24 hours, and we could debate whether there would be many gunshots fired or not, right, during this citizens coup. But when you think out 5 years or 10 years, what are some of the risks that you think that will kind of stop us from getting that place we need to get to? And maybe 1 or 2 points to kind of leave the audience and things that they can really think about and maybe employ in their daily lives if they're interested in the space.
Yeah, I think you're right that we are limited by our imagination. I think that we're limited by our curiosity. I think that there are people out there that are just simply incurious, and they don't think about where does this tomato come from? How come I'm eating, mango in the middle of February in the United States? It's like, I think that there are people that just don't wonder enough how the world works and why things are. I think that a lot of people jump into the how before they ponder on the why. And if everybody stops for a second and thinks about the why, then the answer is, like you say, is of course everyone should buy $100 worth of whatever currency and create that consensus, because there's no inherent value in a piece of paper that is a vector of diseases. And why do I have to pay to a third party 3 to 5 cents on every dollar the transaction that I'm doing. Well, I don't recall the 11th commandment being thou shalt pay fees on every transaction. And so I think that the greatest limitation.
No, that's taxes.
That's taxes, right? And I think I'll say two things. One is that what is happening is that we are changing the equation of value. When we think of value, we say value is quality divided by cost. So if it costs a lot and has no quality, it's not valuable. And so the problem with that equation is two things. One is that quality doesn't mean the same for different people. So for a patient, $1 million pill might be of quality, or for a pharmaceutical to sell it for $1 million might be for quality. But for society, that's low quality because I can't do other things if I have to pay $1 million for one pill. I can't treat another million people with $1 pills. And the other thing is that if you put the cost in the denominator, then you always emphasize to decrease cost. Cost suppression becomes your major strategy. So you want to use less and less and less. There's no money for education. There's no money for healthcare. There's no money for infrastructure. There's no money for all the things that we need, for student loan relief or whatever you want. And suddenly there's tons of money. Suddenly there's tons of money to give to whom? To whom don't need the money. Suddenly there's tons of money to do stuff that I don't understand why we're doing it. So what we're doing is we're changing, what DLT is doing is changing that equation that the world works through. Of instead of value being quality divided by cost, value is what you're willing to give divided by what you're willing to get. And of course, always we want to get everything for free. I want to get a lot. I want to get this. I want to get this. I want to get that. But you realize that the more that the denominator is bigger, it's less of value. Of course, if everybody wants, freebies, then it's worthless. So the true question is, what are you willing to give? So if a company is not willing to give affordable drugs, if a government is not willing to give infrastructure, if I as a person am not willing to give an effort to live well, to eat healthy, to sleep well, to exercise, to not abuse myself, the value prop becomes very low. And so it's really about what's my skin in the game. And that's what DLT becomes so interesting, because it's all in. It's like a poker game. Like, I'm all in. And you can only be upset about if you didn't put enough skin, you can only blame yourself, because it's peer-to-peer. There are no other externalities. And so the reason why I'm optimistic is that we're very resilient. We have enormous capacities, and we have an enormous ability to adapt. And we just have to beware not to become defeatist, that we can be overwhelmed by a virus, or by an oppressive government, or by fear of the others. And as long as we believe in ourselves, and not that we do things right, but that we're doing the right thing, and we reach out to other like-minded people, like you reached out to me, then that's the network effect. Because you're the ambassador, everybody that listens become ambassadors, everybody's talking to everyone, and suddenly you get phone calls from Uganda, from Tanzania, from Kenya, from Thailand, from the Philippines, from Argentina, from all the places in the world saying, how can we change what's going on?
I couldn't agree more. It's in our hands. Everybody's got to stand up. And I would say it's interesting about the blockchain space. It seems very community driven, right? And I would say it kind of has that core principle in it. I think there's definitely some libertarian views, and you could kind of find the spectrum, I think, of why people are into the blockchain space or the crypto space, whatever vertical of it that interests them the most. But Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's up to everybody to stand up now, and hopefully now is a good time for everybody to reflect. And I think, if you would have told everybody 5 months ago, hey, you're going to be stuck in your house for 2-3 months, people would have told you you're crazy, right? And maybe if we were able to take action like this in the same seriousness that we might with climate change, right? If we have a global initiative to make, we just proved to ourselves that overnight we can take drastic changes with relatively, I know it's a lot of people are affected by this, but I would say, if you would imagine the world shutting down in a sci-fi book, it might not even have been as pretty as kind of what we're witnessing right now. So, well, hey, I definitely appreciate your time. We also have some panels and stuff coming up next week. I might invite Alex to, there's one with the teams from Anheuser-Busch and Coca-Cola. If you want to join, I think might be very interesting. So, would sure people would like to hear from you as well. So, definitely appreciate your time. Any last words before we run?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I always love having these, smart and great, inspiring interviews, and people can reach out. Please read me on medium.com, Alex Cahana, and you can read me on Medium and get a glimpse into what's in my head. And of course, you can email me directly or ping me on LinkedIn. I'm alex.cahana@consensushealth.com. So thanks, and I'm looking forward for our next conversation.
Awesome. It was very nice meeting you. So appreciate everybody watching, and we will see you guys for the rest of this week. Have a good day, Alex.
You're tuned in to Reimagine 2020. Stay tuned to learn more about the state-of-the-art in blockchain education and technological development all around the world. Reimagine 2020.